Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in our lives when we look at certain individuals and we only see the surface. The titles, the companies, the inventions, the headlines. We often forget that beneath every great empire, behind every extraordinary idea, there lies a mind that carries not just brilliance, but weight. A heart that beats not just for progress, but for something profoundly human. Today, I want to take you into that hidden place. Not the world of steel, rockets, code, and electric engines, but the inner world. The world of silence between two thoughts. The world of private doubts, of emotional storms that never make the news, of that quiet battlefield between what you feel and what you choose to become. When people talk about visionaries, they often use words like fearless, genius, limitless. But those words, while inspiring, are incomplete. Because no one who dares to push the boundaries of human history does so without trembling hands at some point in their journey. Emotions are not a weakness in these moments. They are the invisible architecture of courage itself. It's easy to celebrate the bold decisions, the impossible goals, the billion-dollar successes. It's harder to imagine the sleepless nights, the loneliness in crowded rooms, and the deep emotional toll of standing against the gravitational pull of doubt. Think about it. Every technological revolution in human history was born out of an inner revolution first. An emotional shift, an ache, a question. A moment when someone said, "What if we could do better?" That question never comes from a purely logical place. It comes from feeling, from frustration, longing, hope, or even grief. In fact, if you truly trace the roots of human progress, it often begins not in boardrooms or laboratories, but in someone's heart breaking for what could be. When you build, innovate, and create on a massive scale, you live in two worlds. One is loud and public. It's filled with investors, journalists, headlines, criticism, applause. The other is quiet, private, and infinitely heavier. It's the world where emotions don't wait their turn. They show up when a launch fails, when an idea collapses, when people you trust walk away, when the very dream you've sacrificed everything for seems to fall apart in your hands. In those moments, emotions are not just a background noise. They become the air you breathe. And how you navigate that emotional landscape determines not just your success, but your humanity. I've spent years studying how emotion and cognition are intertwined, how even the most rational decisions are born from emotional frameworks beneath our conscious awareness. There's a powerful body of research in effective neuroscience showing that emotion isn't the enemy of logic, it is its foundation. Your brain doesn't think and then feel. It feels first, and that feeling colors the way you perceive the world, the way you take risks, the way you dream. The limbic system, the emotional core of the human brain, fires long before the prefrontal cortex, which governs reasoning, even comes online, which means that behind every technological leap forward, there was first an emotional ignition. For some people, it's curiosity. For others, it's anger at how things are. For a few rare individuals, it's a deep, relentless ache to make life multi-planetary, or to electrify the future, or to prove that humanity can build its way out of despair. But those emotional engines come at a cost. When you carry a dream so big it could crush you, your emotional landscape becomes both your greatest power and your greatest test. In the early years of building anything revolutionary, the pressure doesn't come from applause. It comes from the void, from people not believing, from friends who say it's too much, from the internal voice that whispers, maybe they're right. And this isn't some cinematic moment of clean triumph. It's raw. It's nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if the vision is worth the pain. It's trying to speak when your throat feels like it's closing from exhaustion. It's pushing forward not because you feel strong, but because you refuse to surrender to the feeling of being small. And this is where the emotional side of great innovators becomes so crucial to understand. People don't create from certainty. They create from discomfort, from the inability to accept the world as it is. That discomfort shapes them in ways the world rarely sees. I remember reading a line from a neuroscientific study showing how chronic stress doesn't just affect your mood. It rewires the brain's ability to process the future. Under relentless pressure, your amygdala amplifies fear, your hippocampus struggles to store clarity, and your decision-making becomes clouded with the residue of every setback. And yet, some individuals find a way to turn that storm into propulsion. They don't erase the fear. They build through it. They learn to live with emotional uncertainty not as an enemy, but as an intimate companion. Imagine what it means to wake up every day carrying the emotional weight of entire industries resting on your shoulders. Not just one company, but several. Not just one idea, but a network of dreams so audacious that failure would mean not disappointing shareholders, but humanity itself. The emotional bandwidth required to hold all that is something we often overlook. We celebrate the results without ever understanding the emotional resilience it took to get there. In psychology, there's a concept called emotional granularity, the ability to feel, name, and navigate emotions with precision. People who operate at the highest levels of innovation often develop a brutal kind of granularity over time. They learn to distinguish between fear and fatigue, between doubt and danger, between anger and urgency. That precision doesn't come naturally, it's forged through relentless exposure to chaos. It's what allows them to keep building, even when the emotional storm is deafening. When you hear about someone working 100-hour weeks, sleeping on factory floors, pouring every ounce of their existence into something the world doesn't yet believe in, that's not just discipline. That's emotional survival. It's the attempt to turn pain into purpose before it turns you into a shadow. It's about wrestling with the human mind at its most fragile and finding a way to keep moving anyway. Every major milestone in such a life has a hidden emotional story behind it. A product launch that made history might have been preceded by weeks of anxiety attacks, unbearable pressure, or a moment where giving up seemed logical. A single success that inspired millions may have been born out of a private failure no one will ever know about. We love clean narratives. Genius creates, the world applauds, history is made. But the reality is a messier, more human story. It's about how emotion can fracture a person, and how, paradoxically, those fractures can become channels for extraordinary strength. Neuroscience tells us that the human brain grows stronger, not by avoiding stress, but by adapting to it. A concept called stress inoculation. The key difference between collapse and resilience is whether you can metabolize emotion into momentum. I often think of it this way: logic builds the rocket, but emotion lights the fuse. There are days when the data says no. When every spreadsheet, every analysis, every cold rational indicator points to failure, and yet the emotional drive says, do it anyway. That is not recklessness. That is the uniquely human power to defy probability because we feel something worth defying for. It's easy to think of emotions as private, quiet things, but at scale, emotion can move industries. One person's emotional stubbornness can alter the trajectory of entire economies. It can send rockets into the sky, rewire the auto industry, redefine energy itself, because at its core, emotion is energy. And when harnessed, that energy is capable of rewriting what's possible. But what happens when that emotional energy becomes too heavy? What happens when the same fire that fuels greatness begins to burn from the inside out? That is the part of the story most people never hear. The emotional cost of carrying a dream that big can be devastating. It isolates, it hardens, it tests every part of who you are. Some nights are quiet, but they are not peaceful. They are filled with invisible negotiations, between staying the course and breaking apart, between the vision that the world adores and the human who must keep living it. People assume that the greatest danger to innovators is external, failure, competition, risk. But in truth, the greatest danger is often internal. It's emotional burnout. It's the erosion of the self under the weight of expectation. It's the slow, silent war between the world's idea of you and the person you actually are. When we talk about success, we rarely talk about the cost. But every great builder pays an emotional currency long before they get financial returns. Every sleepless night, every doubt, every heartbreak, every sacrifice of ordinary joys becomes part of that invisible price. And yet, they keep going, not because they don't feel the pain, but because they've made peace with the fact that pain is part of building something bigger than themselves. This is where emotional intelligence and resilience stop being buzzwords and start becoming survival skills. High-level innovators learn to cultivate emotional rituals. Silent walks, moments of stillness, immersing themselves in work not just as a task but as an anchor. They learn to be both vulnerable and unbreakable at the same time. And that paradox is what allows them to walk into the unknown over and over again. It's a strange kind of alchemy, to feel so much and still lead as if the storm doesn't exist, to bleed invisibly so the world can dream visibly. But behind every headline, behind every quote, behind every project that changes the world, there's a heartbeat that has felt everything: fear, doubt, rage, hope, love, loss. That heartbeat is what keeps history moving forward. When people romanticize greatness, they often imagine fearlessness. But what they should imagine is the opposite, someone who feels fear deeply and walks forward anyway. Courage isn't the absence of emotion. It's the decision to move through it. In fact, the individuals who lead revolutions often have the richest, most turbulent emotional lives. They don't suppress their feelings. They build their empires on top of them. Every doubt becomes a data breath. It makes every moment both sacred and suffocating. There are days when the applause is deafening, and yet, in the quiet after the noise fades, the silence feels heavier than any crowd. That's because the point. Every heartbreak becomes fuel. Every sleepless night becomes another brick in the foundation of something extraordinary. Emotions don't vanish when you reach the top. If anything, they intensify. The higher the stakes, the louder the internal noise. It's easy to be fearless when no one's watching. It's far harder when millions are. When every decision you make can shape markets, industries, even nations, emotion isn't some passing shadow. It's the invisible weight pressing against your chest. With every external world celebrates results, but the internal world remembers the cost. People cheer for the moment when a rocket lands perfectly, but they don't see the months when it exploded again and again. They admire the company valuation, but they don't see the emotional toll of nearly losing everything. They look at the smile on stage and don't see the fractures beneath it. We live in a world that glorifies strength, but misunderstands its nature. Real strength isn't cold, emotionless steel. It's a living, breathing thing. It trembles, it breaks, it bleeds. But it doesn't stop. That is the secret emotional architecture of those who build what others call impossible. They have learned to live not beyond emotion, but inside it, to let it sharpen them rather than drown them. There's a fascinating pattern neuroscientists have observed in individuals who persist through extreme adversity. Their brain activity reveals a kind of emotional elasticity. Instead of suppressing negative emotions, they acknowledge them, integrate them, and then redirect them. They use fear as a signal, not a sentence. They use pain as information, not identity. This rewiring doesn't happen overnight. It's carved over years of walking through emotional fire and refusing to be consumed by it. I've often wondered what it means to carry the emotional weight of having the world's expectations on your shoulders. It's not just the weight of being first. It's the weight of knowing that if you fall, the world will not just watch. It will dissect, analyze, mock, and magnify your failure. That knowledge is not a neutral fact. It's an emotional storm that never stops circling overhead. And yet, some people find a way to walk through that storm with a steady gaze. That steadiness is not because they don't feel the storm. It's because they've built a quiet fortress inside themselves where the wind can't tear them apart. But even fortresses have cracks, and it's in those cracks that the truest, most fragile parts of humanity live. There are moments of doubt so raw they feel like physical pain. There are nights when the weight of responsibility turns into a kind of quiet despair. The kind that doesn't scream, but whispers, maybe this is too much. It's in those moments that the emotional side of a visionary truly reveals itself. Not in triumph, but in survival. When you look at the arc of human progress, you'll notice a strange truth: innovation doesn't just follow intelligence. It follows emotional endurance. Many brilliant minds have ideas, but only those who can emotionally withstand the storms of rejection, failure, and misunderstanding ever see those ideas become reality. Emotional endurance is the silent differentiator between a visionary and a forgotten name. There's something profoundly human about this. It means the engine that moves humanity forward isn't just intellect, it's heart. It's the ability to feel deeply, hurt deeply, and keep going anyway. And this emotional current doesn't flow in isolation. It affects everything: leadership, communication, decisions, relationships. The emotional side of someone who builds at this scale is paradoxical. They are both fiercely connected to the world and profoundly alone in it. They carry empathy for millions, and yet often struggle to be fully understood by even a handful of people. That loneliness isn't a side effect of success. It's baked into the architecture of carrying enormous responsibility. Imagine sitting in a room filled with people, and yet feeling like the only one who can see a future that hasn't been built yet. That sense of being ahead emotionally and mentally is exhilarating and isolating at the same time. The more you build, the further you drift from the ordinary rhythm of the world. You live in the future. but your emotions still belong to the present. And that tension between vision and reality is where some of the deepest internal battles happen. That's why emotional regulation becomes not just useful, but essential. Without it, the very fire that fuels creation can burn the creator down. Those who survive in these extraordinary roles don't just learn to manage teams. They learn to manage themselves. They understand when to retreat, when to push, when to surrender, when to fight. One of the least spoken truths is that emotion shapes leadership far more than strategy does. When leaders are emotionally fractured, entire organizations wobble. When they are emotionally anchored, they become a gravitational center. Not because they are perfect, but because they are real. Their stability is built from scars, not shields. There's a quiet grace in being someone who can hold pain without letting it poison their purpose. In learning to love a world that sometimes doesn't love you back. In fighting for a dream that you know may outlive you. These are not logical decisions. These are emotional vows, and they are the true foundation upon which revolutions are built. Emotions can destroy empires, but they can also build them. The difference is not whether emotion exists. It always does. The difference is whether it is allowed to lead blindly or is shaped into something intentional. Fear can paralyze, but it can also sharpen focus. Sadness can drain, but it can also deepen purpose. Anger can destroy, but it can also ignite revolutions. This emotional alchemy is what separates vision from noise. It's what allows some to keep building while others crumble under the same weight. It's the reason why, when the world gives up, a few keep going. Not because they don't feel the same pain, but because they've learned to turn pain into propulsion. It's worth remembering that every major turning point in history has been accompanied by an emotional storm behind closed doors. There's always a moment of silence before the world changes. A moment when one person stands on the edge of everything they've built and feels the enormity of what's next. That moment isn't made of strategy or funding or public opinion. It's made of raw emotion, trembling hands, racing hearts, breath held tight between fear and faith. And it is in that moment that humanity moves forward. We often think of progress as cold, mechanical, rational. But look closely, and you'll find it's profoundly human. It's written in the language of emotion. It's built on tears, on stubbornness, on love for something that doesn't exist yet but could. To truly understand what drives extraordinary individuals, you can't just study their companies. You have to study their silences, the spaces between announcements. The emotional architecture that holds everything together when the world is watching. And even more importantly, when it isn't. When someone chooses to give everything they are to something bigger than themselves, they don't lose their humanity. They carry it like a storm inside them, and the weight of that storm is both the price and the privilege of building what others can only imagine. That storm doesn't always show on their face. Sometimes it hides behind stillness, behind humor, behind an almost machine-like exterior that the world misreads as emotional absence. But that exterior is often a carefully constructed armor, not to block emotion, but to contain it. Because when your emotions run as deep as your ambitions, you don't have the luxury of unraveling in public. But when you look closer, in the rare unguarded moments, you'll see it. The flicker of exhaustion. The quiet ache of someone who has given up ordinary life to build extraordinary things. The trace of fear in the eyes of someone who has everything to lose. And if you see that, then you'll understand something far more important than any headline that greatness isn't built by machines. It's built by fragile, emotional, beautifully imperfect human beings. We often celebrate their strength. But perhaps we should also honor their vulnerability. There's a paradox in the emotional journey of those who build monumental things. On one hand, they are architects of the future. On the other, they are prisoners of their own relentless vision. They live in a world that demands superhuman output, while quietly knowing that they are, in the end, only human. That tension can be both a crucible and a curse. To exist in that space is to constantly negotiate between power and fragility. One day the dream feels unstoppable. The next, it feels like a thin thread ready to snap. These emotional fluctuations aren't signs of weakness. They are the heartbeat of high-stakes creation. They reveal something profound about what it means to push the boundaries of human possibility. You cannot separate the triumph from the trembling. Psychologists often speak of emotional scaffolding, the internal framework that allows someone to sustain themselves through prolonged periods of pressure. For some, it's family. For others, it's a mission so immense it swallows pain whole. For a rare few, it's an internal narrative that refuses to let failure define them. But whatever the form, that scaffolding isn't built out of arrogance or detachment. It's built out of need. Without it, even the brightest flame burns out. We talk so much about intelligence, strategy, and ambition that we forget the single most critical factor in sustaining greatness: emotional endurance. Not the fake kind, not the performative stoicism that looks good on stage, but the real kind. The quiet resilience that keeps someone standing after another night of chaos. That kind of endurance is not glamorous. It's invisible. It happens in silence, in the shadows, in the quiet moments no one will ever post about. It's in those invisible spaces where history is actually written. Imagine someone walking alone down a hallway at 3 a.m. after a catastrophic failure. No cameras, no cheering, just silence. A future hanging in the balance. Their hands might be shaking. Their heart might be heavy. They might question everything they've built. That's the emotional reality of leadership. It's not always about certainty. It's about walking forward through a fog so thick that you can't see more than a few steps ahead, and trusting that the steps will matter. This is why emotional intelligence at this level isn't just self-awareness, it's survival. It's knowing how to hold your own despair without letting it consume your team. It's learning to translate fear into clarity, not chaos. It's mastering the art of appearing calm, not because you don't feel the storm, but because your steadiness is the only thing holding the entire structure together. And yet, even the strongest falter. Even the visionaries cry. Even the seemingly unshakable crumble in private. This is the part the world rarely sees, and perhaps the part it most needs to understand. Because when we reduce greatness to superhuman myths, we not only dehumanize those who achieve it, we also rob ourselves of the chance to see how ordinary humans can do extraordinary things. The emotional side of such individuals isn't a side note. It is the story. It's the pulse beneath the headlines. It's the unseen engine of innovation. Look closer and you'll see how every tear, every moment of doubt, every breath held on the edge of collapse becomes woven into the fabric of what they build. Rockets don't just launch on engineering alone. They launch on years of emotional resilience. Electric revolutions don't run on algorithms alone. They run on stubborn hope. And progress doesn't happen because someone was unbreakable. It happens because they broke 1,000 times and kept going. This is what makes their journey not just extraordinary, but profoundly human. There's a quiet kind of heroism in being someone who feels deeply and still chooses to lead, who carries the weight of a world that doesn't always understand them, who endures misjudgment, isolation, and exhaustion not for applause, but for the dream itself. And if you think about it, that emotional landscape is not so different from ours. We may not all be building rockets or industries, but we all carry our private storms. We all know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be afraid, to be stretched thin by the weight of a dream. That's the connection that binds every builder, from the most ordinary to the most extraordinary. And maybe that's why stories like these resonate so deeply, because beneath the scale, beneath the brilliance, beneath the myth, is a human heart, beating with the same fragile strength as yours and mine. So what does it mean to truly understand someone like this? It means seeing past the public armor, past the calculated calm, past the image that the world projects. It means recognizing the emotional depth behind the brilliance, the pain, the fire, the relentless will to keep pushing when the world tells you to stop. It means honoring not just what they build, but what it costs them to build it. That cost is not measured in dollars or headlines. It's measured in sleepless nights, in relationships strained by the weight of purpose, in sacrifices made quietly so the world can move loudly. It's measured in the ache of knowing that no matter how much you give, the dream will always demand more. And yet, they keep giving. Not because they're unfeeling, but because they feel more than most. This emotional intensity, this storm, this ache, is what fuels history. Every great chapter humanity has ever written was powered not just by intellect, but by emotion. So the next time the world sees a launch, a breakthrough, a speech, or a moment that seems larger than life, remember this: behind it stands a human being. A heartbeat, a story written in silence, a mind that dreamed, a heart that ached, a soul that refused to break. And perhaps the greatest lesson in all of this isn't about technology or innovation. It's about what happens when emotion isn't something to be hidden, but something to be harnessed. When pain isn't something to run from, but something to transform. When the most human parts of us become the fuel for the most extraordinary things we'll ever build. Ladies and gentlemen, greatness is not made of steel. It's made of flesh. It's made of tears and grit, and trembling hands that choose to rise one more time. And if you look closely, if you listen not just to the speeches and the headlines, but to the quiet in between, you'll hear it. The sound of a single heartbeat. Steady, unrelenting, human. And that heartbeat, more than anything else, is what moves the world forward.